Welcome back everyone. Today's video is focusing entirely on ailments. This is the video that's going to show you exactly what they do, how to improve their damage, and how to manipulate them to inflict as many of them as possible in your build. Now, we're going to be starting from the basics, so stay with me here. There are 9 different types of damage in this game. They are separated into 3 groups of 3, material damage, elemental damage, and occult damage. Now, each of these damage types has a corresponding effect. Physical will stun, Rend will bleed, Toxic will poison, Fire will burn, Frost freezes, Lightning shocks, Sacred will inflict weakness, Shadow curses, and Ether will inflict stasis. Now, out of all these 9 damage types, there are only 7 that can be stacked, and the ones that cannot be stacked are stun and freeze. They will simply do what they do, and that's it. You cannot stack them, which means you cannot get an immortal offering from them. It's only possible to get 7 different offerings. Which means that when you're deciding to manipulate offerings in order to gain more damage, you probably want to leave Frost out of it because it's not going to increase your damage. It'll just freeze your target. And does that actually help you? Sure, maybe. Survival, yada yada. But honestly, you want more damage, so I prefer to leave freeze out of the equation. Now, I wanted to go over stuns real quick because I bet a lot of you guys have probably stunned some enemies or been stunned yourself. Don't even realize it. Now, all of the effects in this game have an animation that is visible. You see that twirly purple thing over the enemy's head? That is a stun. All of the effects have an animation that you can see in the game. Not all of them are obvious like that or a huge purple skull above enemies' heads. That is a curse, but all of them have it. Now, let's go over how to improve the damage of these different types of ailments. Specifically the 4 that deal damage over time, right? Those are the only ones that we can actually improve damage on. Bleed, poison, burn, and shock. Now, the obvious suspect is ailment damage. On the passive tree, it literally says ailment damage. It will in fact increase your damage. What other ways can you increase the damage of your ailments? Well, physical, bleed, and toxic, which are material damage, can have the bleed and poison damage increase by having material damage percentage in your gear. It can also be increased by having just damage percentage in your gear. Aha! Okay, another way to increase it is damage specific. For example, if you have an accessory that has Rend damage percentage or toxic damage percentage, it will also increase your bleed and poison damage. The same thing goes for fire and lightning with elemental percentage increase, fire and lightning percentage increase. All of those will directly affect the ailment within that group or the ailment that is linked to that specific damage type. Now let's go over the other 5 ailments, the ones that don't inflict damage: stun, freeze, weakness, curse, and stasis. We mentioned earlier that stun and freeze will not give us offerings. That's because they're crowd control. They're a status effect and not an ailment that you can stack up like the others. Those of you running expeditions will have noticed the map modifier that reduces crowd control duration, which is going to affect stun and freeze. Now, everybody has stunned an enemy at one point or another because there's a stun bar. Now, others might call it armor break bar, which is really another name for it. The stun bar is that blue bar right below the enemy's HP bar that has no icon telling you what it is. You just deplete it, it goes red. The enemy gets stunned, a shield shows up above their head with like broken in half. That is the stun bar, armor break bar, whatever you want to call it, right? It is a stun at the end of the day. Now, weakness reduces damage dealt to you by the enemy, curse increases damage an enemy receives from you, and stasis will slow down enemy actions. Now, let's go into what everyone came here to learn. How do we manipulate our ailments? Now, before we go into manipulating ailments, I'm going to explain why, even though you have all these chance to apply ailments here, you don't always apply all these ailments. Now, to show you that, let's first take off our weapon. You know, we have no damage here except our little punches here. But we still have chance to apply these ailments. Now, why is that? That's because you do have those chances, and it's telling you how much chance you have to apply a particular ailment. But you cannot actually apply those elements unless you deal those types of damage: toxic, rend, fire, frost, lightning, ether, sacred, shadow. You have to be able to deal that type of damage in order to apply the elements. Now, without a weapon and no damage type here other than physical, you will see that your skills obviously say they're dealing nothing. Let's see if we can get a wide weapon here from the NPC and just put it on. Bam, we got a weapon now. Now you can see that rend and fire showed up because I have fire on my rings and rend on my amulet. Now those are my two damage types, bleed and burning. Now it looks really basic. I only have two damage types. I have two damage elements, two different elements, right? Let's put on our weapon here, the one we are actually fighting with. We now have 4 different types of damage, but it says that our element chance is stasis and curse only. Why is that? The way that they decide that is by picking the 2 damage types with the highest damage dealt. And that's how you choose how you can manipulate your top 2 elements. Now, normally you would only be able to deal 1 type of ailment, but after picking this node here, Grievous Afflictions, it allows you to apply 2 elements per attack, and that's why we have 2 here. Otherwise, without that node, we would only have 1. Now we know how to manipulate the top 2 elements, the ones that will be inflicting with our normal attacks and our skills that use straight up weapon damage, right? Let's take a look at Bladestorm, for example. Bladestorm's damage dealt is based entirely on the damage types on the weapon. That's why it's inflicting stasis and curse. You can see the different damage types here, how they scaled. Now, of course, there's nodes that can change the damage type, like this one changes physical damage to frost. There's no reason I would do that. It's not even enough of a damage increase, no point whatsoever. But it's an example, right? Now, Ishmir is the same thing, damage entirely based on the damage types in your weapon. So it's inflicting stasis and curse. Now we go to a skill like Bleeding Edge. Bleeding Edge has a very particular trait, which is that it turns your physical damage into rend. All your physical damage is converted to rend. So you don't deal any physical damage, just rend whatever is on your weapon plus your rings, right? So that because of that, rend, in other words bleed, will always be inflicted through Bleeding Edge because it will be our highest damage type. Now, how do we manipulate this even further? With this node here, Unstoppable Momentum, this is very particular to a Bleeding Edge build, right? But it'll explain how you can do things like this with other skills. And I'll even go into that a little bit later on. Now, Unstoppable Momentum, in this case, will remove all elemental and occult damage from the skill. And you will be left with rend damage, which is all physical, and all the damage that was turned into physical that is then turned into rend, and whatever damage is added from your rings. In my case, my rings are adding only fire, so I can burn and bleed with this skill. While this skill is bleeding and burning, my other 2 skills are inflicting stasis and curse. So now we have 4 elements just right there from doing basically nothing, right? Now, in this case, I took it a step further. I added a unique shield, which allows me to cast sacred spells. This could be done with an Untitled mod, you know, have Bulwark of Dawn or any other spell that will work with this. Since I'm an attack build, I don't actually have spell damage. I don't actually have damage to spells. So if I take off my rings, which is being used to manipulate the damage on my Bulwark of Dawn, by grabbing the mod that deals damage, it's only dealing 30 points of sacred damage. That's nothing. By putting on the ring, the damage on the ring goes above that sacred damage, so it is now inflicting shock and freeze. That is how I'm able to get a 5th element in this build. Now we have shock added to everything, right? Now if we go into our tree, we go to Toxic Emanations over here, that adds poison. Now we also have poison. Now we have 6 elements. Then we go over here to Sacred Oath, or blocks will inflict weakness. Now we have 7 different ailments, which is the maximum as far as Immortal Offering is concerned. And now you have a total of 7 different offerings, all boosting your damage. Now that all seems pretty simple, right? Let's get into the complicated part now, which is still kind of simple once you get it, right? Now, what you have to keep in mind is that every time you get an offering from Immortal Offering, that 25% damage of each damage type will be added to your weapon damage, which means that it will also be added to each of those skills And for example, the Bleeding Edge will actually be dealing all those different types of damage from all of those 7 different offerings. So each of those 25% damages will be added here. So Bleeding Edge will not just be doing random fire, it'll be doing rain, fire, toxic, lightning, everything. Everything will be in there. Shadow, ether, every damage type will be displayed right here because each offering will get added to everything. Okay, now this brings a whole different stack of problems here, right? Because if you start a fight, you have to make sure that you apply all of your elements on the first pack that you see, otherwise your damage setup can get mixed up, right? Let's say for example, Bleeding Edge, the poison from your toxic emanations is applied before the burn from the Bleeding Edge. What will happen? The poison will get above the fire, so now the skill is applying bleed and poison, so your burn will not have a chance to apply. So you have to be paying attention to all these things. So far, I've had no problem keeping up 7 offerings as long as I have above 20% chance to apply any element, right? I have done it with as low as 18%, but I have also attempted to do it with 10% and completely failed. So my suggestion is always go for 20% or above and you will be fine. So at any moment that you are not sure about what's going on with your ailments, you can come here to the weapon damage, look at the different damage types that you have set up, which one is lower, which one is highest, and that will help you realize if a damage type got ahead of the other one, or you can just look at the skill, which the ailment that is inflicting will be reflected right away as your damage types change because of the offerings. It will tell you what the changes are. Now, one thing to keep in mind is you don't have to worry about whether you have occult damage, material damage on your gear, because once you have it all laid out from the beginning, being here sitting in town, it will all balance out once you have all your offerings. It'll all be the same. You will not have your elements changing as long as you grab all of them at the same time. Now, what about other skills? You've probably asked yourself, what if they put useless runes on skills like convert physical damage to lightning and there's only a 10% damage increase? This one here, for example, turn to frost, or just straight up do stasis somewhere in here, right there. Now, the reason for that is Ailment Manipulation. This is where they give you the ability to do that on other skills. Just go in there. Most skills, if not all of them, will have an option for that. Now, spells is just the same thing. They either have an option to change the damage type, or they already have enough different damage types that allow you to manipulate what kind of damage you are dealing in order to manipulate your elements. And that's really all there is to manipulating your elements on different builds. I hope everybody found this helpful. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel. We'll keep putting out Wolcen content, and I really hope that this helps everybody learn more about ailments. If you did not understand something, please just leave it in the comments. I will always see all of the comments and answer them. If you have a new question, please make a new comment with your new question, because YouTube doesn't tell me when you reply to my replies. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all on the next video.